Hi everyone, welcome to our very first episode of Book Talk with Storytel, where we talk about books with people, well, basically the bookstagrammers, the bloggers you love, and we get together to talk about the thing that we all, the three of us right now, the audience, our guests, and I really like the most, that is books. And I'm very honored that for our very first episode today, we have with us Mirdula Gupta from Ecstatic Yet Chaotic. I'm sure you guys already know her, and if you don't, immediately go check out her Instagram link and profile, which obviously will be included down in the details. And so happy to have you here, Mirdula. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's a
And
pleasure.
I'm very excited. When I was planning on reaching out to you, I was very excited because apart from the topic which we will be talking about today, you are one of my favorite bookstagrammers. So huge honor and pleasure for me. And
Thank you so much.
right, so today's topic is basically an introduction to Indian literature via short stories. Now, now in today's world, we are seeing that basically in recent times there is huge resurgence of going back to our Indian culture. There are so many different readathons, reading marathons that are coming up, and so many people are joining them. And I think that this trend is a really actually good one because it's forcing us to go back to our own roots, right?
I think so, yes. And also, I've noticed that we are so done with mythology. I mean, there was a point of time when mythology was a chief focus, and we had all
Right.
these readings around mythology, and now we are done. We're like, there's nothing new. So now we have moved back to historical fiction or back to our roots, as we say it. And I'm glad that we have because there are so many amazing stories, and not just in English, in like all the languages that we have in India. And we have translators, we have impeccable translators available to make it accessible.
Right. And I also think, I studied in a convent school, which is like basically a very English medium school. And so the things that we learned in school weren't very well focused in Indian literature. There were, we read Robinson Crusoe, Huckleberry Finn, all of that, which we can say is, foreign literature, I would say, in this scenario. So I think many of us did not get to read Premchand. I never read Premchand during my school days. I never had the opportunity. The only Rabindranath Tagore short story I read was the Kabuliwala, and that was it. And the other reading that I did was on my own, basically, when I grew up and was in college. So I think this basically resurgence is a really, really good thing. And before we move on to this next section, I would like to ask you all of the audience who is present today to definitely check out the huge, amazing Storytel original collection, which is a collection of all of these, short stories from Indian literature. We have many, many famous authors like Manto, then we have Premchand, we also have Rabindranath Tagore. I am also planning on exploring Bibhutibhushan Bandopadhyay and Saratchandra Chakraborty or Chatterjee, who everyone might popularly know as the author of Devdas and even Parinita, if I'm not wrong. So I think this gives a lot of opportunity to us. And, Mridula, I'm thinking that, there is a huge importance of short stories compared to novels, right?
Takes less time, definitely. I think that's very important right now because all of us are busy. We all want something to just like get over this
Yeah,
soon. Investing time in a novel, yes. If you are, I think, if you are a fan of an author and you know that you're gonna like whatever the author writes, including their grocery list, a novel is amazing. But if you want to venture into it, like find new authors and see their style of writing, short stories are probably one of the best.
right. And like regarding our topic itself, which is an introduction to Indian literature, I think short stories are the way to go because the
Are the best.
styles that these authors, all of them take, is very different from one another, right? We'll go through like basic themes very, very soon. But yeah, the overall what was your overall experience reading the various stories, listening to them rather as audiobook on Storytel?
I think, of course, first of all, Storytel has like a brilliant spectrum of books, be it short stories or full-on novels, especially in the regional languages. Because sometimes, if you see that it's always better to read a book in its native language than a translated one, no matter how good the translation
Yeah,
is, the core of it always lies in the native language. And I
the
think
essence.
Storytel has. has this plethora of languages and books, narrated in those languages. And more than that, what I feel, going back to these books or these writers, is they were so strong in their beliefs
Right.
that all of them had a perspective. They did not care who challenged it. So
Mhm.
you got, like, if you look at a theme, I wouldn't say a story, but if you look at a theme, you would always get multiple perspectives around that same theme. Nobody here was trying to be diplomatic.
Mhm.
So when we read these books, they are what they are.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I'm quite sure there were backlashes back in the
Of
day,
course.
and there was criticism, but maybe not as much as now, where we have social media and the writing platforms and everything. But these voices, they stand out so strong and so unified. I think that's what is one of the best features of these short stories. Other than that, of course, the mastery, in like 10-15 pages or 10-15 minutes of a book, I would say, there's character building,
Right.
there's the
Mhm.
society, there are emotions, there's just everything packed into it. And I'll be very honest, in today's contemporary world, there are very few people who are capable of doing that in
Right.
a short
Packing it
story.
all
I
in a
wouldn't say
short
in a full
story.
length novel. Exactly, I wouldn't say in a full length novel, because of course you get some space to work on things, to
Right.
develop things.
Mhm.
But in short stories, no. If you look at it from a literature point of view, I think these stories are brilliant. They
Yeah.
are whole. They are a complete story. They are true to the society they were based in. A very strong voice. So all in all, I think it's a very uh, good representation of the society at
Right.
the British era,
Mhm.
from both the colonizers' perspective and from the colonized
Right.
perspective.
That is really very evidently seen in all of these short stories, most of them, rather, the effect it had on the native Indian people because of all the colonizers. And as well, not only just the British but also the Indians who were working for the British. They were in a kind of displaced position because they were neither Britishers nor were they like actual Indians, because they were working for the British people and yet they were Indians. But they had to obviously take the British people's side. And I think it was also really really well portrayed in all of the books. And like you just said about the power of a short story, I think the real caliber of a writer or storyteller is seen via his short stories, how much he can pack into a short story, especially because of the word count, which is much less than a novel. In a novel you have so many pages to build up the story, but in a short story it's like you said, just a few pages, and in case of audiobook, like 15 minutes roughly. So I think, yeah, it really tests the mettle of the writer.
Right.
Right. So I actually have a note of all of the amazing, amazing authors I've recently read and am planning on reading again. And I'm really excited to read Bibhutibhushan Bandopadhyay and Manik Bandopadhyay. I've heard quite amazing words, things about them, and I think that it will give me a broader perspective, right? And especially because of short stories, I would say the kind of things that they write are also different. Um, in this regard, I would love to bring into focus Sadat Hasan Manto and Munshi Premchand's works. They were very progressive writers. They were actually members of the IPO, which is All India Progressive Writers Association, which were basically, this group of writers who wrote very radical in those days. I mean, sure, even in today's terms, very radical books, because books and short stories, plays, all of that. Because I've seen that in Munshi Premchand and Sadar Hasan Manto's works, they really criticize a lot of the social evils. And one of the things that really irks people to no end is when somebody is criticizing the religious aspects of people. And in that regard, I do have to say that people often, like people in power, often misuse the religion that is they're responsible of. I'm not saying any religion is bad, but the way, the suppose say the pandits, the Maulvis, the people who are responsible for interpreting that, the rules, the scriptures, I think they're the ones who like really are sometimes hypocrites. And it is in criticizing them that these authors were so radical. I'm sure if we wrote those kinds of works even today, it will go haywire, because we all know how the scenario is today, right? So I
So,
yeah.
Naika, sorry to interrupt, but when we say about opinions, what I feel personally, that these authors shared observations. I
Right.
wouldn't say opinions because that's too strong, and we haven't really gone back to those authors and asked if these were their opinions. But what I would say is that their observations, they brought to us a society
They
uh,
actually saw happening.
with its glories and its downfalls. Exactly. And to be very honest, if we go back all those years, empowerment wasn't a thing there.
Not at
We were
all.
too busy gaining freedom to actually worry about empowerment.
Right. First
We did
from the
not care
British
about
and
that.
then from the people above who were
So
oppressing.
the general education of religion or oppression was lacking. The poor thought that this was their position in the society and this is how they were supposed to be. The rich thought that they have the power,
They're
they have the
continuing to
money.
be rich. Yeah.
Exactly. It's a thought process. So I would say that most of these authors shared their opinions rather than, I would say,
Both
I mean,
opinions and
sorry, most of the
observations.
authors share their observations rather than opinions.
Mm-hmm.
And I would also say that, since we talk about Manto and we talk about Premchand, I think these are the two authors who've picked up the most neglected sections of the
Right.
society. And when I say neglected, I do not mean the rich and the poor, the most basic caste distinction. What I mean is that all the different divisions among them. For example, if you look at Kali Salwar, or
Mm-hmm.
which is by Manto, which is a very popular of his book, it talks about the life of a prostitute, and the
Right.
importance of emotions in her life, or the importance
Mm-hmm.
of festivities in her life. So
Right.
it goes beyond the classical distinction between rich and poor.
Mm-hmm.
It goes to
Because
a very deep level of humanity,
right,
and
absolutely.
how we are like how we are not letting a certain section of the society enjoy the most basic happiness or festivities of humanity because they belong to a certain section.
Right. And there is
So
generally this
yeah.
conception when it comes to this story that prostitutes, we have dehumanized them. That's what I would use that word, because we don't see their experiences as valid. We don't see their experiences as experiences the way we would put importance on our own. So for her, for the author, for Manto to put importance on her story, Sultana, I think her name was, the characters in Black Salwar, Kali Salwar, is again breaking away from the expected tropes and expected topics you could write about in those times. And within that, I think it was very, very radical, talking about, again, like you said, a marginalized section of the society, not in terms of class, just class, rich or poor, but in terms of other ways, and especially a person who is as marginalized as she is, right? She's a woman, she's also a prostitute. So her position is really in jeopardy, and Manto does pick up her story and writes about it.
And Manto did face a lot of backlash during his time
Hmm.
for his idea of women. I mean, people really thought that he was bringing the vulgar aspects of women, or
Bringing brutality.
observing those things and writing about that. But to be very honest, that's what makes a woman. I wouldn't say all in all, but there is a part of it. Of course, we can say the male gaze,
Yeah,
which is very
absolutely.
common these days. Everything just comes under the broad umbrella of male gaze.
Hmm.
But it also gives us a glimpse of the society. I mean, it's not just Manto who's observing women from that perspective, but then there is an entire range of society who has the same kind of observations.
Right.
Like
And
in today's world, that would come under like 10,000 different topics of harassment and a lot of other
100 other
topics that
things. Yeah.
power people use on a day-to-day basis.
Hmm.
But that was life then, as simple as that.
Right. Okay, you were stuck for just a second. But yeah, like you said, Manto's topics were really, really radical. And there's also another short story that he wrote, which was Cold Meat or Thanda Ghost, where he talks about this, sort of a sexual scene, which turns very violent towards the end. And because of that, I have this note right here that Manto faced a trial in criminal court because he was charged with obscenity for the story, for writing about the basic act of sex. And it wasn't even actual sex, they were just foreplay and stuff like that. But talking about something as essential or as normal as that in that society was, look at
And
this.
that too with probably a dead body, I believe. I remember reading it a while back.
No, no, no. I think
So
the
the
dead body aspect comes in later, but like
okay.
the two lovers, they're talking about this, and then he tells about the dead body. But yeah, can you imagine? There are so many smutty novels today. We love reading smutty novels sometimes, but then he faced, this criminal charge for writing obscenity in his story. So I think it was really, really well, for us it's really eye opening, because there was no freedom of speech in those times in certain aspects, I would believe.
So at that point of time, not even freedom of speech, but writing,
Mm-hmm.
like
We still
writing
had
what
to
you
decide.
wanted to write. Exactly. So if you didn't have like what we call as a thick skin, you couldn't be a
No,
writer. And
absolutely.
if you were a writer, you wouldn't survive in that world.
Mm-hmm. If you wanted to
And
write
again, when
what really mattered.
exactly, like these authors during their era, half of them didn't even know how brilliant they were.
Mm-hmm. Nobody.
They just wrote, they just
Yeah,
expressed. That's it. They just expressed, they wanted to bring a change. And even today, our minds, there are still certain themes and certain topics, that hits right where it hurts.
exactly. Especially this, this story of, not just this story, there are so many stories related to partition, and how women, the issues, women had to go through, rape and all of that, harassment. It really is very, saddening to read all those stories, but it's also more, important to realize that those stories are real. They happened, the treatment of women, and not just women, the harassment, that happened during the partition. That's a actual topic. There's a partition, there's something called partition literature today, because of all the authors and what they wrote. I mean, many of them, their stories come under that very genre of partition literature, which is, even taught as like particular papers in certain courses in literature.
I think so. Yes, it's a very important. It's become a genre on its own, I would say, because there are still so many layers to it, and it's not just about division or distinction, but we have so much of emotions and I mean tangled up in it, and so much of character build that's going on. I think it's really important to peel those layers and actually see what's going on.
Right. And regarding this issue of partition, we as people today living in 2021, in way ahead in the future, for us it's very clear, we are both Indians, we are living in India. But during those times in 1946, 47, 48, the identity as to whether you're a Pakistani or an Indian, it must have been so, you know, on unstable ground, because some um, relatives would be left behind in the other country, and you would move away to another country, and the whole action of that mobilization was in itself so difficult, moving from one country to another. And then on, in terms of class levels, social levels also, if you're moving from some place to other, you might, in terms of a social level, you might go up or you might go down, basically mobilization in those terms. So I think those were really, really well portrayed in their works. There's also this story,
Yeah.
Open It, Koldo, I think, the actual,
Although, yes.
where rape, trauma, and all of that. I just, that one was really, that struck too close to home, especially being a woman as well, because even today, no matter what social media says on social women empowerment and everything, would you be free walking about alone at night? I'm sure you wouldn't. No one would, because
None of us would. None of us would, no matter how how empowered we are, how aware we are of the
Mhm.
situation around it, or how prepared we are. I think no, no,
Absolutely.
it's not possible. We wouldn't
And
think about it. The books that we discussed about Manto right now, for rape and violence, this one book by Manto, which I think is beyond all of it and will still break your heart, which is Toba Tek Singh.
yes, I've read
That
that one.
book
My God.
is that story is simple but not.
Yeah,
You know
especially
the way
because of
it
the.
ends.
Mhm.
Yeah, the way it ends with a man lying in a no man's land
Yeah,
without
exactly.
knowing where he is, which country he is in, because partition has screwed up with the mind so much,
Hmm.
and prison has screwed up with the mind so much. So there is nothing, if you look at the writing of it, there is nothing very violent in it, or very extreme in it, or grotesque in it, but the emotions, the
Right.
chords it struck is painful.
Yeah, and I think, his last act of, just going still on that, like you said, no man's land, just that, strip of land between the actual borders of India and Pakistan, that felt like a very deliberate action of a very sane action of an insane man, because he refuses to, believe that his land, the Toba Tek Singh land, is neither in India or in Pakistan. For him, India and Pakistan are still the same, and so that place is an essence of what many people probably felt like, and yet had to, move to one country or the other. It was really a sad book. And I think Anupam Kher, whom I'm sure everybody knows here, did a really good job with the narration. And
Yes.
yeah, it was a sad read, especially because of the mental health aspect was also brought in many ways. His way of the protagonist's way of seeing the world was very innocent in that sense. And so we never like something bad happening to a person when he's an innocent bystander, mostly.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's about Manto. And then if you look at Premchand,
Mm-hmm.
who is another author who has a lot of stories on Storytel, I believe.
Yeah.
Uh, if you look at Premchand again, he used to write in Hindi traditionally.
Mm-hmm.
Then there are his stories which flows like water. I mean, the choice of words or the language that he uses is so simple. Like you wouldn't get like a climax or a dramatic end to things, but even then his perception of the society again, from a literature perspective, it's brilliant.
Right. And the way he basically picks up these topics, you wouldn't give second thoughts to them, but because you think, they are happening every day anyway. But from the stories that I read, he talks about certain issues, mostly which are, all class associated, I would say, from the ones from which I've read, class associated and the hypocrisy of men. Basically, I think those were the two key themes that, I got from the stories that I read. Because
Toxic masculinity is something that is there in the society by default. Other than that, I think he also focuses a lot on the prejudices within a community. For
right.
example, the shroud,
Mm.
where we see this Dalit community
These
there,
men,
and the chaos that is already within the community. So you don't have
right.
to wait for another high class or a low class person to come and create problems, but their internal prejudices are so much
Yeah, there's
that they
already
bring
a
sufferings upon
hierarchy.
themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly, that they bring sufferings upon themselves with the choices, I would say, the beliefs, the way of life,
The
something which
addiction,
we ignore. We always like a broader spectrum. We
right.
always, try to distinguish as less as possible: rich, poor, privileged, underprivileged.
Right. Very
Uh,
basic
we
terms, very
break it into,
basic
exactly, we
dichotomies.
break it into two opposites.
Yeah.
But there is so much more.
Mhm.
When you enter
Many
into
layers to their
underprivileged, there
writings.
is so much more.
Right. And when he writes about all of these corruption that were prevalent among, well, I would say the, socially more privileged class, and privileged not in just terms of money, but in position and all of that. There is this, corruption, a lot of corruption that,
Yes.
and because of that, the poor man has to suffer a lot, I think, especially in a dark winter night, because of all this sharecropping that the farmers had to do. They suffered so much. They had to give all these taxes to the zamindars, and then again another layer. There were layers upon layers of taxes they had to pay. And in a cold winter night.
Basically, exploitation at its maximum.
Mm-hmm.
So we already had a colonizer exploiting us. Then we had a series of people exploiting us,
Right.
because they had people working from them, then we had Indians working from them. Then the Indians had to decide which side they were on, whether they could smuggle from the colonizers or whether they could smuggle from the colonized.
Mm-hmm.
So there was so much of, I would say, so many middlemen in the
Right.
society that eventually the poor people remain poor. The
Right.
ones
No
who are
money left to
actually,
them.
exactly, the ones who were, if you look at the farmers, or if you look at the people who made salt, like the story,
The
the
protector
protector
of
of
salt.
salt. So we talk about salt taxes. If you look at that, they were at the same position. Their social standing, or I would say their income, never increased,
Mm-hmm.
because there were so many middlemen making money, and the taxes getting higher every day, because obviously eventually the government also realizes that things are getting away from the middle, so we need more money. So then more people, more taxes, and it was just crazy out there. I mean, I understand that there's corruption now, but then that was like a different level altogether.
Yeah, and especially in those days when not everybody has jobs. We know that today India is a very agricultural country, but in those days the percentage was much higher. So more people were farmers. So a lot depended on the weather and all of that. If it's bad condition, then your whole crop is gone. Then how will you pay the taxes? That's one level of tax that you're in debt now. And then again, say there are different levels of debt also. And then in those days, we all know the condition of women for marriage, dowry. There's another debt because the father had to take on for the marriage and all of that. So I think Munshi Premchand's works, he was also called the Upanyas Samrat. I have not read any of the novels by Premchand, but since I've come across this fact, this trivia sort of thing, that he is also named as Upanyas Samrat, um, I'm excited to delve more. Well, not more, but delve into his novels and see for myself how they go.
I would honestly, with for Premchand, I think I would honestly suggest that if you're listening
Mhm.
to the novels which are available on Storytel, uh, always go back to the native language and listen. Listen to it in Hindi. His language, I think, is pretty simple, unlike Manto's, where you had Urdu
Yeah.
intermixed with Hindi. So difficult to understand, and we always look for, a translation available. But Premchand's writing is like very basic Hindi. So if you're a little, fluent in Hindi, I think you can do it. And it's
Mhm.
always better to listen to that because I think the essence is lost a little bit.
Absolutely.
No
And you
matter
know,
how great a
yeah,
translator, a little bit of it is lost
थोड़ा चला ही
the
जाता
moment it is translated into a language.
है. And I also came across this fun fact actually this semester when I was going through the works and writings of various, progressive writers, that Premchand actually also used to write in Urdu. He studied in a madrasa, and his initial writings were in Urdu. I think his first ever novel was in Urdu. So it was a fun fact to come across, and I thought I would bring it up because of this context that we're talking in. Um, then compared to Saadat Hasan Manto and Munshi Premchand's works, I think they're on a very serious note. But when we come to Rabindranath Tagore, they're on a very, I would say, cozy, heartwarming. They're also sometimes very sad, but they're not as intense as Munshi Premchand or Saadat Hasan Manto's works. Intense as in
You know,
cathartic.
with Tagore, I feel whatever, like I have of course read his books and it has the same themes, I would say again. But then you would notice that most of his books are set within a household.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good
Whatever
thing
is
to say.
happening is happening from that perspective. People coming together in a house, that cozy environment, that home environment where you have, cups of tea being passed and people talking about things
Right.
or life happening. But in a house, the setup itself is like a very
A
nice
very
and setting. For
limited
example,
setup, I would say.
exactly, if you look at Kabuliwala, it talks about borders because the Kabuliwala is from Afghanistan
Yeah.
and the author's daughter, who's set in Kolkata,
Mhm.
West Bengal. It was not West Bengal then, I believe it was just Bengal. So from Bengal, but even then, when he talks about boundaries, when
Mhm.
he talks about affection, it's still set in his courtyard.
Right.
So he gives us that cushion, he gives us that cozy background.
Mhm.
It's like come, settle, and deal with life.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. He gives
So,
you a
I
support
think that's
system
what
in that words.
I like that about Rabindranath's books. Even like you look at any of his books, even if they are his famous novels, and even if it involves traveling places, they'll always bring you to a house. He'll bring you to a room, then give you your necessary reality checks. But he'll do that. He'll make you comfortable first.
He makes you comfortable, absolutely, yes. And in that, I think it was nice to read, especially because when I was reading these books, I read them in the order of first I listened to Manto's works, then Munshi Premchand's, and then they were very serious, of course, and I was like in this sort of sad, sad funk, and then I read listened to, I'm saying reading, but yeah, I listened to Rabindranath Tagore's works, and even though they were, sometimes they had sad endings, I think he really sugarcoats them in a way, and he provides a lot of support as well to the reader. So it's a quite a bittersweet
I
experience,
think,
I would say.
yeah, exactly. And he's a Nobel laureate.
Yeah,
So obviously his books has everything in it.
right.
Like
No wonder
from
he's a
a
Nobel
bird's
laureate.
eye, exactly, from a bird's eye view of the society, and especially given the fact that he comes from a privileged society,
Mm-hmm.
like someone who comes from money, someone who comes from a rich background,
Right.
someone who has enjoyed the pleasures of life. He writing about the society and the social distinctions with precision, with perfection, with such, such what would I say, such grittiness.
And yet such
That
open-mindedness as well.
and exactly, and it's I think it's amazing the way he did it because I think nobody else could do it.
Right.
And of course, he was multi-talented, so he always included a lot of elements in it. His
Various
poetry,
aspects.
his
Yeah.
writing style, exactly. Even his music, even the Rabindra Songit that we call it commonly. It's beautiful. It's so layered and yet honest.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And the way he talks about people, I think the core of all his work is people. People in
People.
from various, walks of life, facing various problems. So I think it really, endears him, his works to us, his characters to us, because in one way or another, we always see certain aspects of ourselves in these characters, no matter how different they are from us, I would say. So, who are some of the next, authors whose works you are looking forward to reading? I would say in Indian
I
literature.
honestly see Saratchandra is one
Mm-hmm.
whose books I really, really want to explore.
Mm-hmm.
Because to be honest, when a book comes into a movie, you're like, oh yes, movie. But then you always want to go back to, and to be very honest, like since Bengali is my mother tongue,
Mm-hmm.
and unfortunately I do not know how to read in Bengali. I really, really regret that because we have such amazing authors. If you look at Manik Bandopadhyay and Bibhutibhushan Bandopadhyay, which you want to explore too,
Yeah.
they wrote in Bengali.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it comes to the essence.
Right.
Right. So
And
I really want to read them in Bengali, but then for that I'd have to learn the language.
mhm.
But still, I am really trying to find the translations available. And of course, see Storytel. I think here again, I would say about Storytel, it's that since I understand Bengali, I can listen to these if there's a version available.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there are a lot of books in Storytel in Bengali and other native languages. For example, just going a little divert from our main topic of discussion here,
Mm-hmm.
but if you see K.R. Meera,
Yeah.
the author of the Poison of Love,
Mm-hmm.
one of my favorite
Hangwoman as
favorite
well.
authors, exactly,
I've just
Hangwoman as well.
discovered her last month, and I'm hoping to read more of her works.
She's brilliant. Please blindly go into it. I just love everything she writes, like everything.
Mhm. I've
Anyway,
ordered
so
more
even
books
her
till
book,
now.
like she originally writes in Malayalam,
Yeah.
and her books are available in Storytel in Malayalam.
That's really great. I did not know that.
Yeah,
So I'm sure our
exactly,
audience will take note of that as well. And whoever understands Malayali will read her books in the original language, because I think, like you said, the whole essence is, exact and full in those actual words rather than
exactly.
translations.
And I think a couple of Rabindranath Tagore's books are also available in English, I would say.
Yeah.
In stories, full length
Yeah.
novels are there.
Yeah.
And
Gitanjali is also there as
I
far as I
found
know.
translations pretty okay. Of course, if it's Arnav Sinha, then like I'm a huge fan. I'm going to listen to it irrespective of what the book is. But again, those translations, I think they are pretty well done there. So, even they could be given a listen to.
Right. Right. So, wrapping up today's session, I would firstly like to thank you, Mridula, very much for being with us and discussing about all of these amazing authors, the themes in their works, and furthermore, recommendations that we can definitely delve into. I'll make sure to make a note and link every book, every short story we have mentioned down in the description box so that you guys can check them out as well, and add them to your TBR or your wish list, or even just go and pick them up ASAP. We'll also include a link of Storytel, which will basically give you the best value for money that is going on right at the moment in the description box. And yeah, I'm hoping to pick up Bibhutibhushan Bandopadhyay next, and perhaps the next time we come back with another episode of this, we will have some yet more amazing books to talk about, and some again amazing recommendations. And once again, thank you so much, Midula, for being with us here
Thank you,
today,
Nika.
despite your busy schedule with your work and everything. It has been amazing. And personally, I am very happy that I got to do this with you. So one of the major achievements of this year for myself. So yeah, thank you once again. And we'll end it here. Once again, I hope everybody's enjoyed it, and stay tuned for more. Take care. Peace out. Bye.